Hello.
Hello.
So my name is Margaret Wang, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in California. I specialize in working with people with anxiety and depression, primarily women of color, and also athletes and women in the medical field. And I'm just very excited to be here with Sharmishtha today.
Me too. Hello, Margaret. So I'll just do a little intro for me. I'm Sharmishtha Gupta. I'm a licensed mental health counselor in the state of New York, which is where I studied and did my clinical years of licensure and training. And then I moved back to Singapore, which is my hometown. So that's where I am now. And I work with, I think we overlap in a little significant ways that I think we'll talk about today. I work with mainly women in their 20s and 30s. I do also do some adolescent work as well. I work with a lot of third culture kids, people who are sort of straddling different cultures and figuring out their own personal identities. And so anxiety, depression, self-esteem really show up as some of the major themes for me. And it's really rewarding work and really great to do it here now, back in my home. So yeah, this is our first time having this kind of thing, this little chat. And so I think the idea came really because we do have some overlapping sort of demographics, let's say, of East Asian, Southeast Asian women, sometimes kind of more high achieving women who tend to have, anxiety show up in the forms of sort of perfectionism or overachieving. And so we wanted to just have a chat today about some of the sort of common themes that we see come up for women who are dealing with especially cultural identity struggles and anxiety and depression and how they show up uniquely perhaps for them.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we kind of talked about is how it can be a unique experience when you're balancing multiple cultures and how that really affects your mental health. And so from a personal standpoint, I was born in Boston, Massachusetts, and then I came to California for high school. And so I feel like that has kind of shaped the way I see myself as an Asian American woman and how other people see me. I think there's a big part of my own kind of maybe experience with internalized racism just because I grew up without a lot of other Asian peers. And so it was kind of unacceptable for me to express parts of my Asianness. It was better to assimilate, and that was kind of safer for me as a kid in Boston, Mass, and around the 1990s, and then coming to California, where in Silicon Valley, where it's a very high percentage of people who are of East Asian, Southeast Asian descent, and my expecting to fit in automatically. And then because I wasn't Asian enough, there added a layer to that sense of identity there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. What when you say how people perceive you, I think I'm curious about what you've experienced in terms of how you might be perceived based on where those where you are, where you were, either in Boston
Yeah.
or in California.
I think when there were some microaggressions that I would experience, like living in Boston. It was almost like, oh, your English is so good. And it's like, well, that's the only language I speak besides French. So what do you expect? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then things like that, and then like coming to California and kind of it not being natural to eat with chopsticks because that would be seen as othered kind of behavior.
Mm.
And so kind of and then now in my 30s I've gone to this place where I'm accepting those parts of myself and I take
Mm.
pride, but it's taken a very long time for
Yeah.
me to acknowledge and kind of integrate all those pieces, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it sounds like there's so much externally that has also changed in terms of maybe people just being a little more aware, or that there's a little bit more kind of, I don't know, ways in which people have, you know, just culturally, societally, I think there's just been a little bit more awareness of even what microaggressions are, right? Of being able to sort of identify
Sure.
ways that people are othered or treated, badly, that aren't as like overtly racist as perhaps prior to that would have been a more black and white experience.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think both the internal and external sort of changes can, yeah, makes
Sure.
total sense of like what you're describing of this evolution. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I guess, yeah, I think when we had touched base to sort of talk about this, I think you brought up some of these things that I still feel like I'm processing in terms of my own identity. Like I identify as a third culture kid, which just as a really quick definition is like somebody who grows up in a culture outside of their parents' culture, and so
Mm-hmm.
you're not living within sort of the culture that your parents grew up in, and you're also not necessarily local or assimilated into the culture of where you're living. So it's really kind of
Mm-hmm.
common with some expat communities, some sort of like some of the communities that resonate with it are like military communities that move around the world, and people who move for
Mm-hmm.
jobs, and then their families are growing up in that culture. So for me specifically, I was born in India, which is where my parents grew up. That's their home, that's their culture, that's like really easily their like ethnic racial identity. And then I grew
Mm-hmm.
up in Singapore in an international school bubble. So I was never
Mm-hmm.
integrated into sort of Singaporean local culture. And so everyone I went to school with, we have some of those shared experiences of being either third culture kids or at least straddling a couple different cultures, and figuring out where we fit. And I think especially in school
Mm-hmm.
years, that's you're already doing that as a human to sort of just figure out
Yeah.
who you are.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about sort of the what you speak English so well, like I grew up in a school that was an English medium school in a country that was an English colony from a country that was an English colony. So English
Yeah.
is like my first language in every way. Even though
Mm-hmm.
my parents tried to keep Hindi alive as my mother tongue. But when I
Mm-hmm.
went to college in California, I went to Scripps. That was, I would get that. I would be like, I'm from Singapore, and people would be like, oh, you speak English so well. And I would be really confused. I was like,
Yeah.
thanks. Like, I was just very confused
Yeah.
by it. It's like, you're being nice, you have a nice tone, but it's very
Yeah.
confusing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, of course, college was um, a large part of really getting some more vocabulary and sort of frameworks to understand kind of
Mm-hmm.
what a microaggression was, to sort of just take a little bit more effort to sort of define my identity, and who I
Mm-hmm.
am, right? So even saying I'm from Singapore, um, people in Singapore would I would say I'm from India, right? Like mostly that would be where I'm from when I'm here as a child.
Mm-hmm.
And now, fast forward like another decade, I have a pretty strong connection to the US. I spent 10 years there.
Yeah.
Um, it was sort of my entire adulthood until I moved back here. So really, really, my closest communities are there. Um, my accent is very American, which it always was a sort of international school accent even before the US, but I think it's become even more American since.
Yeah.
And so I get comments here. I had someone I've been going to do my like facials for me for like two plus years. And so she made a comment that like every time I speak, I sound like she's watching Netflix, which is like her way of saying American, right? Like she's like deeming my presentation very American. And so that's
Mhm.
a little, that's another piece that I'm like, I do present perhaps as with my accent as more American. And yeah, it's like it's another piece of my identity. But again, if we want to be technical, right, we come back to sort of ultimately I'm a brown woman, I'm South Asian. I live here in Singapore where I grew up. That's what I know. I think
Yeah.
in New York especially, it was like it was okay to just be a little, people I experienced like less assumptions about where I was from or who what my identity was than at least in SoCal liberal arts college little
Yeah.
bubble
Yeah.
there. But
Yeah.
anyway, so long story short, I think
Yeah.
yeah, I'm still also figuring out kind of how to even yeah, integrate, right, all of these different parts of
Mhm.
me that are influenced by different cultures and also just different stages of life. And
Yes.
so
Yes.
yeah, it's a lot. It's complicated.
It is. It really is. And kind of like, the comment that you get from the person who does your facials, like how does that affect you? And you growing up or spending time in one place or another can't really capture your identity. It's so much more complex than that. At the end of the day, it's that person's own journey to
Yeah,
figure that
yeah,
out.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, a lot of people can relate to having moved or lived in a couple different places, or that even as you're describing within the US, that the coasts have been such a different experience.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think it can be different for different people. And what it comes down to is just, I don't know, having space to really sit with your own identity and with what that
Mhm.
means. And it's really
Mhm.
interesting to get to hear other people's experiences with sort of figuring out their
Yeah.
journeys in life, right, in this therapy world, like
Totally.
we're, we're witness to in so many ways. But I think just
Yeah.
to think about, yeah, identity and how people think about themselves based on some of these
Mhm.
experiences.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
I was also kind of thinking about how both of us, because, especially you've had a number of different places and a number of different cultures that you've exposed to and probably internalized. And I'm wondering, like, what your experience is with um, interdependence and independence and
Mhm.
collectivism and individualism. Like, for me, I see collectivism as a person who's defined by other people in a group, where I see individualism as you are uniquely defined by your own identity, not impacted by other people. What's your experience in terms of, personally or with clients? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's such an important topic. I think that, yeah, I think that initially especially from sort of just like a anthro history point of view, had always sort of seen it very black and white. Like these are the cultures and countries that are more collectivistic in nature. These are like, this is the East, this is the West, right? The West is more individualistic. These are these Western values that
Mhm.
sometimes come in and clash with Eastern values. And I think that I'm really finding, especially as I work with clients who are straddling kind of multiple cultures, and I think living in a country that is Asian, is very Asian, but
Mhm.
that there are these sort of influences that come from being a pretty multicultural, sort of globalized city.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think there's just more nuance, I guess. I think each person can
Mhm.
have some maybe influences from family and from sort of deeply ingrained cultural identity and culture around them.
Mhm.
that are perhaps more community oriented or based on other people's expectations of you, right? So you're living based
Mhm.
on how you're supposed to be. But then I
Yeah.
think there is a lot more, yeah, there's just been more individualism born in sort of maybe the last few generations,
Mhm.
where
Mhm.
there's space to maybe challenge some of the sort of ways in which things, the status quo, right? And maybe
Mhm.
try to figure out how you fit into it rather than just fitting in or trying to fit in without question. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I see sometimes, like with my clients. Just for FYI, I might mention this from time to time, but when I talk about my clients, I'm going to be very careful about revealing details and sticking to generalizations and observations. And what I've kind of noticed is that sometimes it seems to be about um, there are gender role obligations or
Mm,
expectations
mm,
tied to gender. So maybe if there is uh, a female that is more likely to take care of an ailing parent, and it's kind of on the female to take that on. I've also seen men kind of use their education as a way to give back to their family,
mm,
as
mm,
it might be kind of ingrained to give back some of the finances they've made, as a way
right.
of expressing gratitude for the family, even if the family can afford or can't afford that, you know?
Right. Right. The filial piety sort of idea of
Yeah.
that's an expectation or that's sort of yeah, like a really ingrained part of family dynamics to sort of to take care of your elders, to take care of parents,
Yeah.
even if it's, yeah, whether it's financial or otherwise. And yeah, I do think there are
Mhm.
these gendered ways in which the expectations are put on people, and it can be a bit of a tussle sometimes on kind of accepting perhaps that, right?
Yeah, yeah, and oftentimes it's sometimes like there's this expectation that maybe multiple family members live together, and that's a way
Mm,
of kind of like sharing those obligations. And sometimes it almost becomes this emotional kind of baggage or this
mm,
emotional obligation, if that makes sense. Like kind
mm,
of
mm,
having that expectation placed on certain family members to take care of the anxiety that maybe
mm.
the parents or grandparents aren't able to express.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. That it's not just down to support in the form of finances or even sort of caregiving in the more traditional kind of, ways. But yeah, I think the emotional, I think you put it really well, right? The like holding or taking care of the emotions. I think also when I work with clients that are coming to therapy and really invested in exploring their own stuff and figuring out how to cope better in life and just sort of manage
Mhm.
all the challenges in life. Um, Often some of the things that they're challenged by are their families, and a lot of those people are not going to therapy. That's still
Yeah.
something that's like stigmatized and
Mhm.
not okay to do, as I think some of the older generations are still just, it's they're, I guess they're dismissive of the significance of sort of mental health, anxiety, depression, that these are valid and real experiences that we have a lot more tools and vocabulary for than they did,
Mhm.
growing up or even as adults. So I think, yeah, with the
Yeah.
clients I work with, and I think especially what you're saying around having to hold and manage other people's emotions, it's
Mhm.
often that those people are not aware, or at least um, you know so often, right, the family members are perhaps dysregulated, or acting out in ways that we as therapists or in this work might be able to see as emotional dysregulation, or things that they're having. There's trauma that passes down generationally too, in these ways of how they treat their family members, how they treat their children. So yeah, I think that, yeah, it makes me think of the clients that work so hard, but that they're struggling with issues that come from family that don't have the capacity, or don't have the knowledge, or don't have the awareness to really be able to tackle their own stuff.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And just to parrot that there's often this mentality of, just suck it up, you know, um, just move on. If we keep trudging forward, we're not
Mm,
held back by that past.
yeah,
Whereas really,
yeah,
in the upcoming generations, that baggage is definitely going to affect those future generations. And
yeah,
instead, it's like the it's almost like I don't know how to frame this articulately, but like almost like the privilege that comes with being the generation that can process, that has the ability to bypass the stigma of seeking mental health,
mm,
and kind of um maybe the parents or grandparents generation, they weren't in a position where they could slow down and look at these harder things because maybe they were in a fight or flight kind of state, or maybe because of their parents' generation, they weren't able to explore those deeper
yeah,
issues. Um,
yeah.
so I think it's something that very much affects, both our clientele, and I very much enjoy talking about this subject.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. I
Yeah.
guess a thought that popped into my head as you were talking was around boundaries, because I think that that's
Mm.
like a really big topic, word, like sort of almost trendy at the moment to be sort of talking about boundaries. That I it comes up for me with clients where they're navigating these sort of challenges with family, and they want to set boundaries, right? Or try to sort of change things within their families. And I think for me, I really found that boundaries, or boundary setting, boundary exploration, is like step two. Step one is so much more around like the client's internal um, acceptance, or sort of
Yeah.
digesting, right, of what the
Yeah.
limitations are, of what, I don't know, being able to sort of help support someone to sort of validate what their struggles are, and then also maybe move towards some acceptance of limitations of what their parents or grandparents or other family were able to do, right? That
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
validity that they were harmed, and also then there's space to look at, well, your parents were limited in these ways, right, based on what you just said, of
Mhm.
like less access, less openness or opportunity,
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
for their own reasons they were limited. And so I think that that's an important step before the sort of trying to change some of the things that are not
Yeah.
working, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really good point. Like there's this you have to start with the individual first before you can start setting these boundaries, because it's like oftentimes I think about how this is, like you mentioned before, how it's very much like an emotion regulation kind of based problem. And it's really about, okay, what are my needs first? What are my wants? What are my feelings? And kind of having some definitions, labeling around that, and then
Yeah,
being able to, and then pick up the tools to be able to take care of yourself. And then finally, you can start setting boundaries. And it might be, like you're saying, it's um, such a catchy phrase at this point, and it's so it's such a big bucket to fill, you know,
Mm.
it means so many things, and there's so many ways to go about it too.
Yeah, 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 for sure. It's its own topic, perhaps our next webinar or podcast or whatever this is on boundaries. But yeah, just to continue also on what you were just saying, I think sort of helping someone figure out their own individual process of the needs and their wants and what is going on for them internally, and then being able to ask for it, being able to express it. I think that's
Yeah,
something a lot of people struggle with, especially in Asian contexts with Asian
yeah,
upbringings, that to actually ask for your needs, to express what you feel is not something that was taught very easily to us, right? It's
yeah,
something you learn, and I think it can be learned in a therapeutic space, um, ideally with that safety of being able to really just learn for yourself first, and then really then be able to share it with people, whether family
yeah.
or otherwise, like all relationships in your life.
Yeah.
um yeah, it's such a it's an important and difficult skill, I think, to being it to be able to express what you need, right? Like it's
Yeah,
but it's so
yeah,
important. It's like so
yeah,
so sort of building blocks of healthy, relationships, but it's a lot. It's a lot to learn, and it's I think particularly challenging in an Asian context.
yeah, yeah. And just kind of to piggy off that, I think a lot of times it's like there's a lot of invalidation that maybe our clients have experienced, like um, their parents saying, "Oh, you know, that's not a big deal, whatever you experienced." And then
Yeah.
us being able to create that safety where they can finally get to this point where they can acknowledge themselves, hey, that was a really tough situation and that didn't feel good, that that hurt my feelings, and kind of being able to sit with it. And that's kind of something that, you know, I feel like me personally, I've worked on too, just learning to sit with my feelings. And I really like the whole idea of using self compassion to validate your experience. Like, oh, somebody else in my situation would feel this way, even if maybe the parents or grandparents' narrative might be, oh, that's nothing, and kind of recalibrating that narrative.
Yeah, totally, totally. Being able to maybe poke at, unpick some of the narratives that have been ingrained in us by parents, by our like adults in our lives who
Yeah.
you really take in as knowing you, as knowing the world, as your kind of models for how to navigate the world, and then yeah, as an
Mhm.
adult to feel sort of like so dissonant with your experience because a lot of
Mhm.
the message has been that it's, not a big deal, or like, or just not
Mhm.
understanding, right? That I think, especially when we talk about,
Yeah.
kind of growing up in a different environment perhaps than your parents did, whether that's generational or physically different,
Mhm.
that perhaps there's a lot of experiences that they just don't understand, and that therefore
Mhm.
they can I don't know, push away as something, well, I don't get that, and therefore no, I don't think it's a big deal, right? There, I think
Mhm.
as humans we
Mhm.
can do that really easily. Like, I don't understand this, so I'm gonna push it away and not look at it.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. Um, I'm wondering if you want to head on over to the topic of, you know, identity tied to parental dreams, and kind of what
Mm,
your thoughts are on that and how it
mm,
ties into culture.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I feel like, yeah, that's just the title of that, identity tied to parental dreams, is so,
Mm,
it brings up sort of sadness for me. It's like, I think I
mhm,
see it a lot with, with young adults, right, who are just sort of figuring out what they want to do in life, like not just work wise,
Mhm.
but just the sort of space they want to take up in the world.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people I work with, and I think my own experience too is that there's like a very clear expected path. Like, this is what you should do. This is how you should um, pursue your studies. This is the kind of jobs that are well regarded and acceptable.
Mhm.
That I think, yeah, my parents weren't as I think my parents had a lot less rigid expectations of me than other folks that I've gotten to connect with and clients I work with. But it's still there. I mean, it's there as sort of this yeah, this like anchor perhaps of like this,
Mhm.
especially, I don't know, I think I'm jumping around to a few different thoughts, but I'll say them
Mhm.
and you can pick one to not get us all scattered. But this
Yeah.
idea of, I think that, like, let's say my parents have a particular worldview based on their particular experiences and their particular
Mhm.
paths in life. And so then their expectations of me were within that sort of framework, right? That there was this
Sure.
kind of some set expectations. And I think that me kind of following this path of being a mental health professional already strayed from that. It was
Mhm.
something quite like alien for my family
Mhm.
to learn about as I went about the journey of figuring out that that's what I wanted to do. Um,
Sure.
but yeah, I think I work with a lot of folks who are at this, especially in your early 20s to mid 20s to beyond, that you're really sort of straddling.
Mm.
Here's what's been expected of me. Here's the paths I've been walking along that were the right ones. Like, I did what I'm supposed to do, and maybe I don't feel like this is it. Like, maybe I don't feel like this is
Mm.
fully what I would like to do, right? Work wise or otherwise, that there are things that don't feel quite satisfying or meaningful or personally important, but I'm checking the
Mhm.
boxes. I'm doing the things I was supposed to do. So I think that's where there's room to really, yeah, have this conversation of how much of your identity and how much of your decision making throughout your life has
Mhm.
been based on family expectations, specifically parents, perhaps. And at what point do you take a pause to sort of really check in with yourself, right? Of what is
Yeah.
it that you want? What is it that is important to you? What are your values? So I think, yeah, that work is really enlivening when I get to sort of work with people who have just followed
Mm.
a path or just
Yeah.
done the right thing, but they're not
Mm.
happy, right? They're not feeling
Right.
fulfilled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I can very much see that in some of my clients. I think there's this sense of, for some of them, it's like the they feel obligated to take on this career because it's more stable. And if they don't, they'll be met with a lot of questioning and anxiety. And that can be hard for anyone, yet alone someone who is trying to figure it out for themselves. And so oftentimes, what I see is like, okay, how can we get to a place where you feel comfortable in your decisions to go this path? And then later that, down the line, you feel comfortable being able to reveal that to your parents. And it's I wonder, sometimes I don't know if you experience this with your clients, but sometimes it's like there's this fear of disappointing, there's this
Mm.
fear of, you know, there's all the sacrifice that their parents and grandparents made, that they're not living up to that if they choose this uh, different path. And so that can be a heavy weight to hold, and especially if there might not be some understanding around it.
Right. If the expectations continue to be, maybe valuing the stability or the money or things that are that are, just valued differently or valued higher than perhaps
Mhm.
somebody's personal satisfaction.
Yeah.
That can be a really hard thing to then say, hey, I disagree, right? Or that
Yeah.
I value my personal mental health or my personal sense of satisfaction from the work I do over the things that perhaps, like a reputable type of career or like a well-regarded, esteemed sort of area of work, that to sort of challenge that can be so hard, right? Especially when your closest people are saying one thing, like family. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
This also kind of makes me think about self-care and kind of how
Mm,
sometimes we've been taught that taking care of yourself is something that doesn't belong to us, and rather
mm,
kind of reframing it as it isn't a selfish feat, rather it's something that in order for you to be able to show up for other people, you've got to fill your own cup. And
yeah.
so I don't know what your experience with that is, but I find that that's a lot related to emotional regulation. And if I can identify what I need, if I can identify what I'm feeling, then comes in line the taking care of yourself. Like, oh, it can be as simple. Self-care doesn't always have to look like getting your nails done or, you know, taking a trip
The
to
spa
somewhere
day. Yeah.
extravagant, right? It can be part of self-care is getting appropriate sleep. It can be checking in with yourself when you need to um, eat a snack, or maybe it's taking space from, you know, an unhealthy coworker. It could be any of those things. And it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it doesn't have to be this flashy, fancy thing.
Yeah. Right. And absolutely what you just said of being able to identify your needs and express as well, is part of self-care, is giving yourself space and attention and understanding from yourself, right? I think that is
Mhm.
it's really important self-care. And yeah, that the idea of it being selfish, I like to sort of poke at the idea because yeah, I think you're absolutely right that reframing it to be that it's in the service of everybody else in your life, everyone that you're wanting to help and support and be a part of their uplifting, that to take care of yourself
Mhm.
means to take care of everyone. I fully, encourage that as a framework too. I also think it's okay to call things selfish and to sort of own that.
Mhm.
Like if it is
Mhm.
selfish to prioritize yourself or to fill your own cup, even if it's for the purpose of helping someone else, I think that's okay, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
again, it's like sort of values based of like
Yeah.
how horrible a thing it is to be selfish is sort of culturally
Yeah.
defined and sort of different for different people. I
Yeah.
personally am very pro being selfish, like especially in a world
Yeah.
or in a culture where it's been really hard to prioritize yourself, right? It's been really hard to sort of
Yeah.
just like allow yourself to be the center.
Yeah.
So if there's any inclination to do that, for especially when I see clients sort of like okay with the idea of, you know, like sort of conceptually okay with the idea of being the center or prioritizing
Mhm.
themselves, then I'm like super encouraging, like let's just embrace being selfish. Like let's
Yeah.
allow that word. Let's make it not such a bad word, you know.
Yeah, yeah. What a cool reframe, you know, that it's okay to be selfish. There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's a little
yeah.
semantics, right? It's like when people say that
Right.
things are childish, like
Yeah.
I remember this even in my counseling program, I think people would sort of say, okay, that's it's judgmental to call something childish. Like you might describe it as childlike, like that's softer. And so I think that yeah, fair. So maybe we just use the
Mhm.
word prioritizing self or centering yourself. Um,
Yeah.
But if what we mean is being selfish, then I think it's okay to like just let's, redefine the word to be more
Right,
positive.
right, right. Exactly. Um, I don't know if you want to go into summarizing, but I feel like this was really fun, and I just really enjoyed talking about all these different aspects around mental health and how it relates to different subcultures, and East Asian, Southeast Asian culture. Of course, this doesn't just limit to these cultures.
Oh, for
Uh,
sure. I think so many people resonate. I was sharing about this with someone here, that we were going to do this, and they're a white, ethnically white person, but they've like lived in
mhm,
Asia for a long time. They have a mixed, cultural, like mixed race, marriage, and mixed race children. And it's like,
mhm.
we live in a world that's pretty diverse, more increasingly diverse, and a lot of the ways in which people's cultures are coming together and clashing and aligning and sort of like
Yeah,
flowing, that yeah, I think a lot of the things that we're talking about will resonate with a lot of different kinds of people. And
yeah,
it feels like we're just starting, like each of them could be, so much more. um,
yeah,
they're so complex, there's so much to sort of dive
yeah.
into with all of them.
Oh,
Yeah.
definitely, definitely.